now.
All right, welcome to episode 3 of season 3 of the Disciples Standard podcast. My name is Aaron. I'm a pastor here at Sunlight Community Church. And on the show today, we've got 2 guests here. First, senior pastor of Sunlight, Pastor Scott Vanderploeg. And of course, now we have our first guest here in Pastor Zach Olson, campus pastor of the PGA campus. Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Have you, how accustomed are you doing podcasts and podcasts? Because I'm not, right? So this is, we're all trying to figure this out and feel out like our conversations and all that. How do you feel? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you feel comfortable on podcasts? All that kind of stuff.
Listen to loads of podcasts, but I'm really good at talking. And
Okay.
so this is talking with a mic and video in front of me. So I'm ready to go.
Very good. And of course, Pastor Scott, if you guys haven't checked out already, seasons 1 and 2, Pastor Scott was doing those seasons too. And there's a lot of information, a lot of thought went into those episodes. But for right now, we've got this new format, Zach and Pastor Scott, on just kind of free-flowing dialogue. And I just want to know, you have been a pastor here for about a year and what?
2-3 months.
2-3 months.
Yeah.
How's it been? How's it being a pastor at Sunlight Community Church, a campus pastor? Talk to us a little bit about yourself, if no one knows.
Yeah, no problem. So I've been a pastor for about 15 or 16 years in 2 other congregations that would be considered more like a traditional kind of setting, established church. And so your question, like, what's it like to be a pastor at Sunlight?
Yeah.
And then what's it like to be a campus pastor? Those are like 2 brand new variables.
Really?
Because, yeah, the other gigs were like solo pastor roles that eventually turned into co-pastor. Like in each one of my calls, we hired another pastor. But yeah, here's just a lot different being in a campus pastor role. It fits really well with my skill set. I love it.
Yeah.
Especially like training and developing leaders. That's just my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But even being a part of Sunlight is, I don't know if I could like just put it in a word, I'd say refreshing.
Okay.
Life-giving.
Life-giving.
Just the ability to. Well,
What
this
does
is all
that
part
say
of,
for the What does that say for the other?
well, so I think that like the biggest thing is just what I've noticed about Sunlight culture is there's this idea that hey, we're here to make disciples who make disciples, and so if we come up with a ministry idea or plan or experiment, well, I've heard you both say it. Go until somebody says stop. It's just this culture of let's try it.
Yeah.
And let's go.
Yeah. Pastor Scott, I think I want to ask you this. A lot of people have said this, right? You've said this to a lot of people. Go until someone says stop. Is your mic over there? Okay. we'll fix this one. Yeah. Hold on. Let me.
Come off. Breaking the show. Boy, this could be a funny part of the show. We're new at podcasting. Zach is good at it. His mic is just staying right there.
Should we recheck his mic? Okay. All right, we're good to go.
Seems so much more in front of me now.
All right, we are back. Thank you for editing.
Technical
a lot of that.
difficulties.
Yeah, technical difficulties.
The set's falling apart.
So Zach mentioned about.
This is the first episode.
What do you mean?
On his first episode, the set just starts falling apart.
It's all right. It'll probably.
It
actually
wasn't him,
happened.
it was me.
It happened the other 2 episodes as well. I think.
Really?
It's this table, really, is what it is. There's coffee all over it and stuff like that now.
Okay.
Good. Unflappable.
Unflappable.
That's good.
What's that? I don't know what that word means.
It means like
It means this didn't bother him even a little.
Oh,
cool as a cucumber over here.
not Pastor Scott though. It's bothering him like immensely.
Well, it's my mic.
Doesn't bother me. I'm okay. I got a good mic here. Let's see. Back from unflappable to a culture, workplace culture. Okay, so you said that go until someone says stop. Pastor Scott, why do you tell that to people? What is that? Is there like a special, like, what makes you say something like that? I know there's certain drawbacks because obviously someone can keep going and something be very bad and say, no, stop. And they're like, well, like, why is that a important saying that you say or aspect of our culture here?
Well, I think I've learned this over the course of time, and we had as part of our ministry here someone who's a very, very good friend of mine, Jay Smith, And in his career, he worked for GM, which is a large corporation, and he also worked for Ross Perot and EDS, which is a large corporation. And he talked about having two totally different work environments. In his first work environment, the culture was stop until someone tells you to go. So
Been there.
you cannot do anything. You cannot think. You cannot move. You cannot act until someone comes and tells you to do it. And then when he moved from GM to EDS, the culture was go until someone tells you to stop. And I think what the second culture does is sort of honors the skill, the talent, the experience, the wisdom of the people who work there. It's not like, it doesn't have to be go and just make 1,000 mistakes and no one will ever tell you, because you can come around and say stop.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense.
As long as someone is able to tell you stop, right? You're not offended by someone saying stop. That's what
Yeah, because hopefully the person who's coming around to say stop is also the person who told you that you can go until they tell you to stop. And they're not going to tell you to stop just for random reasons. It's going to be like, hey, there's something that you need to consider or something you need to take into account that maybe I see that you don't, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So I just, especially having Jay around who had those work experiences and then trying to figure out how best to proceed in ministry, to me, it makes a lot of sense to understand that God created all of us with the ability to be creative and self-initiate and to honor that in each other rather than have it's better to have a permissive culture than have a culture that's just full of prohibition. Like, you cannot do that, don't do that, don't do that. Like, what that makes a person feel, I think, is that the hammer's about to fall at any minute. I better not step out of my lane. I better not do anything. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Using that stop and go language is really just a way to describe like a high trust and a low trust environment. If you're stop until someone says go, there's low trust, right?
Yeah.
But so think about why would any organization hire skilled people or people that they think are skilled enough to hold the position if they're going to rely on one person to determine how those skills ought to be used? To me, that doesn't make sense. Where you have in a high trust environment, a go till someone says stop. This is what I think we have here. Is we recognize that everybody has gifts, everybody has talents and skills and experience that is valuable. Let them use it.
Yeah. You said that you've been there. I want to go on that while honoring that. But just recently, we lost one of our facilities people. So shout out to Josh. He's still a good friend, still comes to church. Shout out to him. However, in his exit interview, he mentioned this exact thing. He was like, I love an environment where, we could keep on trying and fail forward and stumble towards excellence. He was repeating all back our core values here. And we just recently reshifted those. But he was saying, like, I love that I never even expressed it, but I watched someone else do it. They tried like a Winterfest or they tried something, and I got to see them try it and fail, and no one made a big deal about it. Actually, it was kind of celebrated that people tried something. I never did myself, but I appreciated that I got to witness it. So I thought that was really interesting. I think from the perspective of someone in the workplace culture, it's like, oh, that's where I'm in. Like, you don't have to experience it for yourself firsthand. You could just kind of observe it. However, I did say that I heard Zach say under your breath, been there on a stop environment. Now, while honoring your past, Sunlight's my only church where I've worked for. But so correct me if I'm wrong, you were the pastor of 2 other churches.
Correct.
And maybe you were like a denominational, I still don't know, like coach, a consultant, something like that?
Yeah, I was a ministry consultant with our denomination.
So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how did they stop and wait environment go? Like,
So I'd say that, like, this is not one church in particular, nor is it like my denominational role. But what I'm talking about is what I've both experienced in other churches as well as heard other pastors talk about.
oh, okay.
And so essentially what it is it's a culture that says we've got this really long, incredible history of doing things this way. It's a beautiful tradition. It's got a lot of positives. But for the new person, who's, pastors are typically the new person to come in and start to shift things or change things, anytime change happens, there's a bit of anxiety about what is this going to mean? What are we going to lose in the process? And it's harder to see what we might gain. And so I think for established churches particularly, it's more comfortable and safer to be a stop until we say go. Now, this doesn't mean that in my experience, none of my ideas were ever used or utilized, nothing like that.
Sure.
But it's more just, it's the culture. Scott said, like, is it permissive or not? And I think it's probably more accurate to say, like, in a non-permissive culture, new ideas, you have to fight for them, which have its own benefits, right? Like, you have to think through why is this going to help, as opposed to the permissive, which is, let's give it a shot.
Yeah. Could you give an example of that played out in the last year and a couple months here?
Of the go till
Yeah, the go till you stop.
Yeah, for sure. You gave me a campus.
Oh yeah, there's that. Yeah,
Yeah.
give you a whole campus,
So a whole church, and right from day one,
staff too.
you gave me staff,
Staff.
right? You give me staff, you give me a church, there's a
Volunteers.
school there,
Yeah.
volunteers. You gave me really incredible people who came over from this campus, the main campus here in Kashmir, to over there.
Some of my best friends actually. Yeah.
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 So I know that we got really high quality people
Yep.
from y'all. So, yeah, that's a perfect example. And then the message always from day one was, I'm going to help you, and then I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
And so I knew already at the beginning, you guys have no interest in micromanaging what happens there. You have vested interest in what happens,
Yeah.
but not to micromanage.
It's killer. Micromanagement is the worst.
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, the only time that I find myself micromanaging someone is when they're messing up. It's like this is wrong. This is wrong. This has got to change, and that's after so many times. I probably shouldn't say that, but whatever. Like that's
true.
I hate micromanagement. It's the worst. Maybe I could ask. P.S. So he let me really run the show of getting PGA up and running. The people that we plug in. Even the locations to some extent, the process, he kind of cut me loose, and I made a ton of mistakes, but I learned a lot of lessons. And I think that's an example for me in PGA. He said, Aaron, go. And I was like, go, and messing everything up. However, he was the one that said Zach Olson should be the campus pastor. I'm curious what you saw in Zach and what you look for in future campus pastors, or even just future pastors. What do you look for? And what do you see in Zach? Maybe we could brag on him a little bit and brighten his star a little bit.
So listen, I'm secretly really excited about this part.
Yeah, this is good.
The beard, the bald head.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, he's a beautiful man.
And I'm an ugly one, so
No, well, first of all, I've known Zach for a long time now. I'm not sure how long, but it must be at least 10 years by now when we first met each other.
really?
Yes.
I didn't know you knew.
Zach was part of our church renewal lab,
Oh, that's
which
right.
at the time was at Calvin Seminary. And I don't know if you were in the first or second cohort or the second cohort. Okay. And I think, yeah, so we got to know each other, and I was impressed by Zach all the way back then. Just the way he thought about things, his passion for, the gospel and the church. I think, yeah. So we know each other for that much time. I think then, yeah, he had moved on from that position at the church and had taken the job with the denomination. So I think, yeah, we probably had some interactions through the denomination. I can't think of what they were, but I just, I run into people, I talk to people, and I knew that Zach had moved on to that. And I actually thought that was a really good fit for Zach, his personality, his talents and abilities. I thought, oh, okay, I'm really glad that Zach is in that role. So, yeah, I'm trying to remember, but it was probably in like 2020 during COVID or something like that. Then I think everyone was working from home. And then Zach, I think, realized, well, if I'm working from home, my home could be anywhere.
Absolutely.
And I think, well, this is what I remember, and I'm not sure that I know every last detail of what went into your decision, but you thought, man, why would I stay up here in the cold up north when I could be in the sun in Florida? And that makes a ton of sense to just about anybody. And then I can recall that he really wanted to move and somehow be part of Sunlight. So he stopped down here with his family, started thinking about what would this look like for us to move down here. I can remember that you were looking for a house, and I mean, there was just a lot going, and I was eager. At first, I was thinking to myself, oh, maybe Zach could really come and provide some help to our Lake Worth campus.
Oh,
So I got together with Chris and Zach, I think it was maybe down south in Jupiter or somewhere. We had a lunch together. And that was my initial thought, because I just knew Zach was a talented guy, and I thought that might be a good match.
do you just want to like have them meet, or did you have a particular role that you had in?
Well, I didn't have anything in mind. I wanted to hear what Zach was interested in, and I thought to myself, let me get Chris here too. And of course, Chris is now the director for our Center for Church Renewal, and I'd known Zach through the Church Renewal Lab, so that made sense. And I didn't really know what Zach had in mind. I just knew that he was thinking about moving down here to Florida. I thought to myself, oh, that could be a tremendous help to our Lake Worth campus. But I think I came to understand that Zach was really more interested in being up here in Port St. Lucie, which is fine. And then he moved down here, and I think, yeah, you and your family just became great members of our church, and you were working for the denomination. I think at some point you wondered if it was possible to have an office here. We were like, yeah, let's
That's
go.
because we homeschool our kids.
Yeah.
And coming down here, I thought there is no way that I'm going to be able to work from home
No.
with my family around. So I love this part of the story because, like, I called Scott and said, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" And in classic Scott fashion, he's like, "Oh yeah, we can do that. We can get you an office."
Yeah, sure.
I showed up the first day, and we're like, "Where are we going to put him?" So I took up space in the den in classroom.
That's
B
right.
at
I
the
forgot
desk.
that. That's
Yeah.
right.
Did you? Oh yeah, huh?
And I remember, like, just everybody is so gracious, but yeah, it's like, who's this guy
Yeah.
in the den?
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
So you were here for about a year, taking up space in the
Well,
office.
I don't remember the timeline now, but I do recall, like, I was glad to have Zach here
Oh, and me too.
because, yeah, I can remember several times where Zach was over there. Now that I remember that's where you were, and I was in a different office at that point too, and I could just remember walking over and like, "Hey, Zach, do you mind? I'd like to bounce something off you." And I mean, there must have been several of these things, and I'm like, "Oh, this is so convenient that Zach is here. This is awesome." And I just appreciated whenever I talked to him. I thought, "Oh, this is wise advice." I think I like the way he thinking about things and going about things. So, yeah, that happened, and eventually you did move your office out of that place up here,
Yep,
actually,
just down the hall.
down the hall. And I think we probably as a staff kind of just enfolded Zach, and he really fit in, and I noticed that.
Yeah.
And then it was probably you, when you're like running staff meetings, you decided, hey, let me bring Zach in and have him do X, Y, Z. And
That's right. Yeah.
then I just noticed that as Zach was leading our staff meetings, I was like, oh, this is great. He's doing a great job. And I don't know, when you notice that someone's doing a great job, you just notice it.
Yeah.
So then I think as we started thinking about planting the PGA campus and moving our middle school over there, and what would the church wind up looking like, starting to think about what will the leadership of that be. And I actually think we considered over any number of different ideas. But I think at some point it just, yeah, you described it as, I told you, I kind of remember it as like just more of a discussion. Like, what about this? What about that? And then I think
Yes.
it was like, well, let's ask Zach about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Zach, you'll probably say more about what that was like when we first sat down, like, what about this? But my recollection is that immediately resonated with him. And yeah, I don't know if the word surprise is the right word, but I think I was a little surprised about Zach's eagerness to jump in with both feet, because I thought where he was working with the denomination, that was a really good spot for him, and I thought he was really good at it. So it surprised me that, he would be so quick to say, hey, yeah, not that, this.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably, sometimes we talk about God's calling on life. We think about the external calling and the internal calling.
Mm-hmm.
I think what wound up happening, I don't know, you should take over. Why am I still talking?
Yeah.
But there was some kind of internal call.
Yeah.
And then it was met with an external need, external calling and reality, and it's worked really well.
Yeah. So what went in your brain with, I want to touch on that. Like, how do you determine your calling or a leading of God, an internal call and external call, what all that means? But talk us through about how you were thinking about jumping in. I remember being super surprised too. It's like, whoa, he's ready to go, and we barely have a building up here. So talk to us a little bit about that.
When I was in that denominational role, I certainly felt what Scott was expressing. Like it matched my gifts, my calling, I think, and it was a really great fit. And worked with incredible people who really wanted to see the church grow. From that point, I remember initially the thought was, hey, could you help out? And I thought, oh yeah, for sure. Casey, my wife would love to come over here and help us start something. That sounds great. I think my first offer was, man, I can be here like 4 hours a week because I get done on Friday at noon, and I'll come over here. And you're like, no. That's not near enough. That's a volunteer position.
Yeah.
But then I think as you're describing it more and more, and I was just thinking through like, ooh, do I want to get back into like church ministry? It took a little while. I mean, for me, it wasn't so immediate. But as we kept talking, and I learned like it's a campus pastor role, which is more of like managing staff, leading a campus that's more than just a church, developing people. I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah.
And so,
You did over Zoom.
what's that?
You did over
I did this over Zoom.
Yeah.
And I love video calls and the technology. I mean, I was meeting with pastors. I met with a pastor in Spain, in Canada, on the West Coast. I mean, just everywhere. But there was something about just being in person.
Yeah.
The reality is that, I mean, I was traveling monthly for about a week at a time or so in that denominational role. And I mean, I've got young kids.
You don't want to travel.
I just thought, this is not the right season to travel. There might be another one, but this is not the right season to travel.
I've actually grown to like disdain traveling a little bit. Like, I don't want to travel anymore. No. Not right now, at least. There's like I got to pack up the kids. I'll have like 2 car seats and all kinds of stuff. I don't want to do that. That's too much for me.
I'll even tell you, like, my oldest daughter just turned 13 2 days ago.
Okay.
I've been a mess. Like, just looking through old pictures of her growing up, like, through all the stages, I'm like,
Sure.
man.
Our oldest daughter
5
share a
years.
birthday.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Marissa. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. Not mine.
That's right.
So-
It's the only date in a calendar year that's also a sentence.
What?
March 4th.
Dad jokes are coming out.
What's the point of this podcast?
Yeah.
So, all those things really came together. And then when you had, I think, initially floated the idea of being like half-time, I thought, yeah, I think I could make this work if it worked with the denomination. But I thought I'd just ask about, well, what about full-time?
Yeah.
And
That's funny. It was slow for you, but it seemed fast for us. That's interesting. I want to go back to this topic that we talked on. I just had a conversation with a coworker, and she was talking about, Aaron, how do I determine my calling? And so this is kind of near right now to me, and maybe for anyone else. But I would want to know what you think about. How did you know, like, it's such a big switch, right? A job change, a career change. I've got a sweet gig with the denomination. I could work wherever I want. Zoom calls, right in my zone of genius here. How do I make the call to switch over into this totally unknown? Well, maybe not totally unknown, but to jump in with both feet or to change trajectory. And then maybe I'll ask Scott about like the internal, external call, what you mean by that. But how'd you determine which way to go? Do you pray a lot? Do you meditate? What do you do?
So I wish I had him with me, but one of the exercises we used a lot in the denomination was something called the circles of calling. And it helped us think about calling from 3 different like dynamics. One is the person who's called. The second is the role to which that person is called. And the third is the context in which the called person performs the role.
Okay.
And so just from using that, and I guess even my own like maturing or developing sense of like what call is, I know that my call isn't located in a zip code. Like my call or being a called person isn't always to a specific place. And so as long as I'm responding to God in obedience with the gifts and experience that he's given to me, I know I can be faithful to my call no matter what role I'm in. And so
could you help me parse that out? I'm not too sure if I follow you.
Yeah,
Like,
you
okay,
got
so
it.
you're saying like, it doesn't matter where you are, as long as you're using the gifts that God has given you and the experience in any job, you're faithful to your call. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say so for sure. Like anybody who's called by God to do something, whether they do that in Port St. Lucie or they do that in Grand Rapids or in Iowa, if they're doing the thing that God called them to do, they're responding faithfully to their call.
Got it.
Living fully into it. Yeah. So that's what I mean. And so, listen, I think early on in ministry, when you're a young pastor and you're entertaining your first calls, it's really, I don't want to say easy or tempting, but it's easy and tempting to think that you're called to a place. And I think there's a part of that, right? Like there's a group, that's the external call. Somebody in some zip code somewhere is offering you a job, like telling you to come. And so then when you talk about it, it's like, I'm called to stay here in this spot. And I hear pastors say this all the time. I'm called to stay here until he calls me to leave. Well, one of the things, and please stop me when this becomes uninteresting, but one of the things that I often would hear when I'm talking to pastors who are in a season of transition is, how do I know God is releasing me from the call? And what I would say to them is, well, he's not releasing you from the call to be a pastor, but there might be some internal parts of the call and some external things like maybe conflict or your family is increasingly uncomfortable or unhappy, that these would be external things that, while they feel really earthly, are nonetheless like tools in God's hands to say, hey, maybe it is time to go somewhere else.
So like negative and positive stimuli outside, externally. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I just think when it comes to be a call, the one thing when I came to Sunlight is, if I leave the denomination, do I put them and the churches at a significant disadvantage by taking this new role? And I didn't feel like I did. I mean, obviously I'm not discounting what I did, but I think there are many talented and qualified people in the CRC who could fill the gap that I left there.
Got it.
Like you wouldn't just say, well, I can be anywhere and be a called person and like leave organizations willy-nilly and stuff like that. That's not what I'm advocating.
Yeah.
But there is a sense of freedom to move around.
So let me help me think through this situation. I am a single mom or a single dad who has a job and doesn't know if I need to take this job and keep it safe, or I feel somewhat called. Other people are telling me to take this other job. Okay, how does that work? Like, I'm just going very practical, street level theology. How do I determine what's God's call in my life? And I don't know, I don't hear him, but how do I determine that? Walk me through that.
So there's a number of ways. I know you had asked Scott about the internal, external, but this is just the way that Christians and Reformed people have thought about calling for a long, long time. The internal call is, there's a sense in which God interacts with your spirit to give you peace about something or to give you direction toward position. Now, in your scenario, you said there's none of that happening with the mom. She doesn't feel one way or the other.
I guess it was a hypothetical scenario,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But I mean, if there was a sense of peace about taking one role as opposed to another,
Or restlessness.
or restlessness,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I would say that's important, like internal call data that you want to pay attention to.
Got it.
The external stuff is like really external and just earthly. Will both jobs cover the bills? Like, will they allow you to fulfill your first calling as a mom or a single dad or whatever you are? What about the locations? I don't know. If there's two locations, like one is South Florida and one is snowy Michigan, I would say,
Pick the sun.
yeah, why is this a decision in the first place? But no, really, like, do you and your family have a preference? Because yeah, I mean, of course, the Bible is full of times when God calls people, particularly the prophets, to places they wouldn't prefer to go. But that's not the only way He does it.
Okay.
Delight yourself in the Lord; He'll give you the desires of your heart.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to use those as like part of the external factoring.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that? P.S.
Not really.
Okay. Is there like how do I think
Zach pretty much covered it.
how do I think through fear then? Last question on this, but like
What do you mean?
if I'm fearful of the decision, but I feel like there's an internal call and an external call, but you think that fear is actually like you're misinterpreting it as a false internal call. Like, do I just act because I feel good about it, and then external calls are saying affirmative? And how do I determine like opportunities and I guess maybe how do I deal with the fear
That's good.
or reservations?
Well, fear really is like imagining a future in which God isn't sovereign. And so you're
Jeepers
imagining,
creepers, that's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
imagining a future where God has like been leading you up into this point, and all of a sudden He's not going to, and everything's going to fall apart. But instead, so if there's fear, I think that's a place, like that's a discipleship moment where it's time to like say, who am I trusting in, and how am I trusting in God?
Okay.
So that's how fear fits in. How you like deal with that is you discern this stuff in community, right? This is why the church is so important. I know there are people all over the place right now making decisions about their future all by themselves. What do you do with that fear? How do you discern this stuff? You know how when you're thinking about trying to make a decision, like all this stuff is swirling in your head.
Yeah.
Some of it is real, other is manufactured. You need to do it in community. And so going back to like the PGA thing, I got to discern that with you all. I discerned that with my wife. I even discerned it with my close colleagues in our denomination. And just the consistent message was like, you would fit in both. And we could see reasons why you want to stay or go to either. And so, I mean, we were really at the point. I remember Casey and I were driving on US 1, and it's like, we can't make a wrong decision here.
Okay. Because God's sovereign.
Because God's sovereign.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're not slave to our decisions.
That's right.
Yeah.
So at Sunlight, and I don't know if you'd agree with me here, but it seems like we have a disproportionate amount of people who want to be preachers and pastors. It seems like it. And the reason why I say it seems like, because it might seem like other churches might have it, but they don't discover it, or maybe they don't know. But it seems like at Sunlight, at least from my perspective, I'm always looking for like, who is going to be the next preacher? Who can I train to be the next leader? Pastor Scott, why don't you walk us through, like, do you do that? What's your takeaway on my
I definitely
perspective?
think that's part of our culture.
Okay.
And it's just something that I think is particular to the calling of our church, maybe,
All right.
that we really have a desire to train up leaders. I think I've, if I really get into it, I mean, at some point, this happened to me, and so I wanted to push that forward. So I think I started, but I really feel like, yeah, people I've started with have appreciated it and have picked it up as well. So there's a lot of people who are working at training leaders here.
A ton.
And I think together we just feel a mission that we want to expand the ministry that we're doing beyond how it is now.
Do you look for anything in particular? What do you look for when you're looking for a potential leader? I guess Zach you can answer this question too.
Well, I think there's probably any number of different factors. And I guess as I'm thinking about leadership development, even here at Sunlight, I'm not so sure that we should be too narrow about it, because, yeah, God may call us to any number of things all throughout our life with regard to like the tasks or the things that we do. So I think in general, there is a process of sort of discovering what are the person's passions, what are they talented at, and I think it's, I like what Zach said about kind of wrestling about it in community, but I think there is also a way in which you sort of wrestle internally with God also. I would say this, let's just say that it turns out that, you think you want to do ABC, but you're terrible at it. And not only that, you fear it and you hate it. And every time you go to do it, it just it's like the worst.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not what God's calling you to do.
That's funny. I've certainly forced people through that. I was like, it's fine, get it going. And my desire to train leaders, I hate preaching. You do it right now. It's gonna be fun.
Well, I don't know. There is a balance, because I do feel like part of what God does in people's lives is they bring mentors along who push them to do things they would have never considered themselves. I mean, that happened for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was going into engineering. I was a double major in math and physics, and someone came along and like, hey, Scott, I think you should consider this.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a road I was traveling down. And so I do think that's how God sometimes does it. He brings people in your life and you're like, hey, you might not see this in yourself, but you should do this.
Yeah.
And of course, when you go to do things for the first time, you're going to face nervousness or anxiety about it. I guess the question is, are we willing to try it? I think there's a lot of people who do really well to just try stuff.
Yeah.
But as they get into it, if the more they try it, the more they hate it, well, okay. What are the things we're trying that we like?
Yeah.
That fit with our personality that God gave us? Or
That's an important lesson for me, because I felt like I was pulling a puppy with a leash and the puppy was just trying not to be dragged along. I've certainly done that a lot. It's probably a mistake that on my part. What are some mistakes in growing leaders, or some pitfalls that we might look out for when we're trying to train somebody? I mean, when we're training leaders, we have 25 plus preachers, probably 15 plus ordained pastors here at Sunlight between all the campuses. I'm probably guessing around there, and probably more than that. And I would say probably active preachers, I would even say. What are some pitfalls of training so many leaders in this leadership development culture? And we'll get to some of the good stuff.
Are there?
I would say there's some pitfalls.
What pitfalls?
For one, I think that when we train leaders, a lot of times I'll say two. Number one, when I'm training a leader, it seems like they're getting special attention from me. Like I'm with them all the time, and then I cut them loose, and they're like, "You don't hang out with me anymore. I'm supposed to do this on my own," and it's just
wait.
They feel like it.
What are you saying? So for that reason, you shouldn't.
No, I'm saying that's a pitfall.
Okay.
I'm saying how do we can, that's something that we could
Set expectations early on.
Yeah, maybe set expectations. And another one is we train so many preachers, we only have so many stages and so many opportunities to train. So a lot of times they'll feel like there's not an opportunity to live out the gift that they've trained for, or live out the certificate or calling that they earned and accomplished and was affirmed. And then there's no thing. So
Yeah, and I feel like that's on us a little bit, because it's probably our lack of imagination as to what vision we have for ministry.
okay, that's fair.
But I think also, I don't know, just because you kind of feel called to something today doesn't mean that you're going to be doing it fully tomorrow. And actually, in our scripture reading this morning, our public reading of scripture, this stood out to me because God was talking to Moses, and let's say this was in Exodus 23. He says, hey, I'm not gonna take the whole land in 1 year. I'm going to do it slowly, little by little. Otherwise, everything's going to wind up becoming a deserted place and wild animals are going to take over it and it's going to make it difficult for you. So he's like, I'm going to do it little by little as you increase. And I was really thinking about that. I was like, yeah, that's the genius. Because what we think we want is overnight success. So I just got trained how to preach. I preached a couple sermons. I got licensed in classes. Shouldn't I be the senior pastor of a church now?
Okay. Yeah.
Or I don't know. I mean, that's a funny way of saying it. But even for myself, I think this too is like, how come everything didn't go faster?
Sure.
And it's probably like God's kindness to us. We're not able to handle like the people who get instant success, usually they're like, in the long run, they're the people who fall apart the most. Like, it's kind of God's kindness to us. Like, I don't know. As we grow, as we increase, little by little, God gives us more responsibility and opportunity. And I think our culture just teaches us not to be patient. Yeah. So I think it's kind of both. On the one hand, maybe as we have more and more people who are capable, and if people are feeling like, man, there's nowhere here to use my gifts, like as an organization, we have to get a little bit bigger vision, which I think is what we want. We're wanting to expand ministry. That's why we want to. But I think also, I don't know, thank goodness God doesn't just put us in situations where we're way in over our head and we have no idea what we're doing. It's better that we grow little by little and the opportunities will come. God has a plan. Let's just be patient.
Yeah.
You just think about like Moses. He trained 40 years as a prince in Egypt, 40 years out as a shepherd in the wilderness. So
That's an old man.
All right, now he's 80 years old. He's finally, all right, God's like, all right,
Time to step
giddy
into
up.
ministry.
Let's go.
Yeah.
So here we are in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, and we're like, how come nobody will give me an opportunity?
Sure.
Or I don't know. It's that sort of inner anxiety that I think if we just slow down, have some peace about what God's going to do. I think this whole community thing is important. We shouldn't. Yeah, it's possible to kind of get out on your own desert island and think that whatever, But I think if you just keep on working in community with people and getting feedback, I mean, all those kinds of things.
I think speaking to Zach, you used to coach tons of pastors across the denomination, even outside the denomination. I think, is this a typical culture? Is this what pastors think through? Like, let me raise up another leader. Why not, or why so?
I think it's definitely what a lot of pastors want.
Okay.
Is they want to be in a place where they can raise up leaders, raise up pastors. I know, like my pastor growing up, he was very much let me identify leaders and then equip them, empower them, and then send them off. But yeah, I don't know. I know other pastors express the same kind of frustration of like, man, I just wish there was somebody who was even interested in seminary or something like that in my church. And I think it's a culture issue.
Do you think they have to be interested?
You know what? I think it has to be a possibility.
Okay.
So it has to be like one possibility among many. Or I think if you like the closer you get to Sunlight, and particularly like leaders and volunteers in Sunlight, being in ministry is a possibility.
Yeah.
Like it's one of the futures that God could have in store for you. Where I think I'd be bold enough to say that in a lot of like more established churches, that's probably not a possibility. I would even say someone might say, why would I want to do that?
Like, why would I want to step into ministry?
Why would I want to be a pastor?
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. A number of reasons, I suppose. One, sometimes when pastors are treated badly, you think, ooh, why would I want to do that? Right? I get that. I don't know. Just off the top of my head, I could do a lot of guessing.
Yeah.
But I think it's just, maybe it's more, see if I can just give you from my experience, like in some ways, people are, I won't say anything. It's just not as much a possibility or an option.
In when I was growing up, for Filipinos, being a pastor is like revered. It was like, that is the pastor. You say pastor and whatever his name is. Yes, pastor. No pastors. That kind of stuff. It's very revered. Part of this even thinks about like the calling of men in society. Like, I'm not sure if pastors are revered now, and I don't know if this is even true, but it's almost like wishy-washy and kind of like either manipulative or like stupid. Like, that's kind of my sense of how culture might view pastors nowadays. Like, they're either like this overzealous, like I don't know, clueless type of person who's just like kind of in their like, narrow-minded is I guess the word I'm looking for, or they're these mega church pastors who are like deceptive, and they don't believe in God, so now they're taking people's money, and so now that's a line of deception. I don't really see reverence for the call of ministry and pastorship, so maybe that's a reason.
I'd say
Like,
that's
I don't know.
at least one thing I see here is that pursuing ministry is seen as a good goal or a good pursuit. Yeah, I think maybe that's part of it is just like generally there might be in society like this idea about Christians and then Christian leaders either being manipulative or being like, I don't know, the B team of like what people could be successfully in their vocation. I remember one time I was at a classis meeting and we had a representative from the seminary come and essentially say, we need you guys to start sending us better people because right now we're just getting the B team. I was like, yeah. Like, oh man. But I mean, if you think about it, if that kind of idea is more pervasive,
I'm curious what they consider B team people.
I think it would be students who are like maybe mid-level in terms of leadership, mid-level academically, probably could get a job doing something different, but probably needs like the gracious,
Interesting.
permissive culture of the church
Okay, sure.
to be successful.
Wow, jeez.
Yeah. I know. We were all like, what did
Yeah.
he just say?
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I think I mean, look, some of it's even status. Like you said, in Filipino culture, there's reverence for the
Yeah.
role.
Yeah.
In Anglo culture, maybe in some pockets, but generally, like grandparents brag when they have lawyers, doctors, teachers.
Yeah.
Maybe in some still about pastors, but
Yeah.
I make the case probably fewer.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the respectableness of a pastor has gone down over the years. Not that I'm like looking to be respected or anything. I'm just saying culturally, I've seen the respect of that seat or that profession just kind of wind down. So I'm not too sure. I'm just curious about why we're not finding as many pastors or qualified people, or is there some kind of filter that you use, Pastor Scott, when looking for this? Is there, what do you look for? What's the makeup? What if we were considered to send the 18 people? What do you guys look for in people?
I don't know. I'm not sure I want to get caught up into the A team B team thing.
Yeah, not my language,
That
but
was a pretty good lure.
I think we should just look for people that we think God could really use. Just have some imagination about it. Like, man, what if this person really got going in ministry? What could happen? What could God do through them? So I guess I'm just, yeah, you'll notice things about people, and then it's a matter of imagination. And
so you don't look for particular characteristics or anything. You just kind of say like, what can God do through this person, and you try to imagine the widest future possible.
And I guess I would just say also, in addition to that, I don't really have preconceived notions when I'm starting working with a person or trying to really pour into them. And it's not like, okay, I want to spend time with you because at the end of it, I already know that 10 years from now, you're going to be doing XYZ. I don't think it's quite like that.
I think people would sniff that out. Like if they have a sense that you want to shape their future for them, there could be some resistance to that.
Yeah. I guess on the other hand, I mean, I'm just trying to think about it now. In some way or another, when I was a young person, I feel like if I look back, there were key people who came alongside and helped me figure stuff out about myself. And I'm grateful for those people that I mean, it's not like they tried to like make me into who they wanted me to be, but they came alongside and they tried to help me figure out who was I, and I don't know. So I just feel like it's something that maybe we shouldn't shy away from doing. People need that service. They need that help. So instead of we tend to be pretty individualistic in our culture, kind of like, oh, let them figure that out. Well, sometimes people need other people around them to figure out life and where to go. And
Yeah, that's how
I
Satan
don't know. I think actually, like, there's a lot of young people who maybe feel like they're spinning their wheels. What they really need is they need someone to come along and help pull them out of that. And here, come over here. Oh, yeah, okay, awesome.
That's certainly the case, in my opinion. For me, it was like I could, in my opinion, I thought I could do anything that like I wanted to, but there were so many options. I was like, I have this like analysis paralysis about me. And then Scott came and he told me like, hey, you can do this. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And so here we are. Like I'm doing the pastor thing. If you were to give like a framework for helping a current pastor or leader try to raise up another leader, what's a simple framework or way of understanding or thinking that they could start? And then I think I'd probably ask, what can people do now if they have a call or feel like they have a call into ministry? So the first one, you guys have like some kind of way of thinking or a framework, not like steps or anything. You have this kind of just, how do we think through raising up a leader?
I do have a framework.
Okay.
And it's pretty simple.
You like simple?
At least I think it's simple. But it's the framework, not the whole thing. Friendship. Maybe I'll add this word, intentional friendship. Because, yeah, I think actually we've really overlooked the power of relationships and friendships in our culture today. And I think most everybody out there is like dying for friends. And to just truly come alongside someone. And I think when I say friendship, it's sort of like you show up not because you want to get something out of them. You show up because you want to give something to them. Like, here, I just want to help serve you. I just think the world of you. I think that God could really do something through you, and whatever that is, that's awesome. How can I help? But I think really being open and being a friend, that is a big deal. So that's one thing. And then I guess I'd say intentional friendship, because friendships usually are about something else. Like, I think it was C.S. Lewis who talked about like the different kinds of love.
Yeah.
And, in romantic love, it's two people looking at each other.
Mm-hmm.
But in a friendship kind of love, it's usually two people and they're looking at something else.
Right.
So, yeah, I love playing tennis. I love playing pickleball. So I have friends that are my tennis friends and my pickleball friends. Our friendship is there because we relate to each other as persons, but we're looking at tennis or we're looking at pickleball. Maybe you'd have friends that are about music or art or anything else. And what you really enjoy about each other is that you have things in common. That's what you discover. Oh, we have things in common. We both like this. I think, when I'm saying like make some intentional friends, I don't mean like, hey, we both like baseball. Let's go to a bunch of baseball games. That's great. But intentionally about this imagination I'm talking about, like what could God do through this person? And so centered on the gospel, helping them grasp the gifts, talents, and abilities that God's given them. And I guess those are the things that I'm thinking about is if you want to raise up more leaders, the power of personal relationship, love, friendship, I mean, I probably couldn't say enough about it.
Isn't there a problem with that though? And I think the problem would be it's abnormal to try to make intentional friendships.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I think that our culture leads to a more individualistic society. I think one of us said that, but it's like, do people even have the skill of starting a friendship, making a friendship, and keeping a friendship? Namely, pastors or church leaders or anyone else. I mean, like, I just feel like a lot of people have less friends now than they had 50 years ago.
Yeah, maybe our culture is losing a little bit of its ability to relate and make friends. And I do think social media, like we can just have like thousands of friends on social media, but no friends in real life.
Right.
It's probably something that the church can really help with. Like maybe on the rest of our culture, it's, friendship is a dying art. But in church, I mean, yeah, probably the deeper the thing that you're both looking at, the stronger the friendship will be.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, if you have a friendship with somebody around, I don't know, some dumb thing, then your friendship's probably going to be shallow. I think in Christianity, we have friendships that are so deep that I think that's why Christians call each other brother and sister, because it's like, man, these friendships are so deep that it's deeper than a family tie, basically.
Yeah.
Because we're both seeing the most glorious, grand thing, which is the gospel of Jesus. And that, when we're both sharing that together, like, man, that really, we're talking about everything deep now.
Yeah.
So,
Zach, do you have a reaction to that or your own framework?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you about the friendship thing. It's a great environment in which to develop leaders. I don't know. I think, are we less inclined or less able to make friends now than 50 years ago? I don't know.
I think so.
But I know that the need, like our human need for friendship, has not changed in 50 years. So the first thing I would say is, man, if you're someone who is able to initiate friendships, the world is yours, right? Like you've got such an opportunity because people need friends. They might not. They just would be less inclined to do it themselves. I also think like location or culture has a lot to do with this. That's one of the things that we really love about Port St. Lucie is there are a lot of people who move here and leave friends behind. And so they need new networks.
Yeah.
And so we've made incredible friends in like half or a quarter of the time that we expected it would take. Where we came from, and in other places that I've served and been, is those networks are established for a long time, and few people move out, and even fewer move in.
Oh, interesting.
And so, like we would have it at church where, and I've even had other pastors talk to me about this, where they could be in a church for a year and never get invited to go to a family's house.
Oh.
Because like friend groups are already established.
Yeah.
And so I could see like in a scenario like that, it would be really difficult to use friendship as the way to identify leaders. And maybe that's one of the contributing factors.
That's fair enough.
interesting.
We're here. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like it's just so much easier to make friends.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Do you have a framework of maybe another perspective on it?
Yeah. Just generally, like I think one is to expect that God is going to raise up leaders. He's not going to leave his church without leaders. So why would we ever fool ourselves into thinking there are no leaders here?
Sure.
So that's one, just expecting that he'll do it. The other is like curiosity. Maybe you would say wonder what God could do. I think that's really important. But the third thing I do is you just call out the strengths and gifts that you see in other people.
Yeah.
I don't think generally we walk around with a really clear idea of what our own personal strengths and gifts are or how that could be useful in the kingdom. So to have somebody come alongside and say, well, hey, I noticed that, you interact really well with people, or that was a really like emotional situation and you kept your cool. Just things like that, calling that out in people, I think is one of the better things we can do.
Okay. Now, last question. If someone feels a tug or a call into ministry, what's the best piece of advice you could give them?
Wonder what God could do.
Wonder what God can
Yeah,
do.
that. And this is the opposite side of the coin. If you think, maybe God's calling me to become a pastor, why don't you make a great friend of some pastors?
Oh, there you go.
If you think, oh, God might be calling me on the mission field, get to know some missionaries.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
It's the flip side of the coin. It's like if, boy, this is something that you think God's calling you toward, I would say, hey, is God calling you to become like a, I don't know, IT director of da-da-da, and like, yeah, you're a young person who's still taking like high school geometry. Well, like get to know an IT director at some, you know, like
Sure.
become their friend, find out what their life is like, see whether, as they look on at you, do they think that you have the gifts and talents, or, man, you can't pass even basic geometry. You're probably not going to be the IT director.
Yeah, very makes a lot of sense.
I don't know. So that, I just think it's a flip side of the coin. Like, boy, don't think about your call internally in a vacuum. Like, bring it out into community, get to know people. I would say this, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are some pastors who, like, if you showed up and like, hey, I've been thinking that maybe God's calling me into ministry, and I just wonder if we could spend some more time together. It's like, with you? No way. I just doubt that. I think most pastors would be like, oh,
Finally.
awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I've been looking for someone. That'd be funny.
Yeah, I actually think that's the case. So I don't know. I still like caught up on this whole question he had about fear.
Okay.
And I've been thinking about it as we've been sitting here. I think, okay, you've got a calling. And maybe you think to yourself, like, well, I don't want people to reject me, or I don't want people to, whatever your anxiety or fear would be about it. I've been thinking a lot about Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Of whom shall I fear? Then I think that whole psalm sort of catastrophizes. It does a little mental exercise like, well, what if a whole army were against me? What if there are like 10,000 soldiers coming at me? Well, I've got God, so even then I wouldn't be afraid. What if my father and my mother would forsake me? Oh, well, since I have God, even then I'm not going to be afraid. And I think like, this little exercise is probably worthwhile when we think about the sovereignty of God. Is like, we've got to move from our head down to our heart that, you know what? Even if the very worst thing I could think of right now were to happen, I'd be all right. And I'm just thinking about that in terms of calling, because maybe you're thinking to yourself like, oh, maybe God's calling me into ministry, but what if I put myself out there and then people reject me? First of all, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But secondly, even if the worst happens to us, if we really have a relationship with God and we understand the gospel, things are great.
Yeah. You become bulletproof.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone else is out there listening to this podcast or made it this far, I think we have a great program called 222ls.org. It's one of those programs where it's competency-based, and it allows someone to discover their gifts, talents, abilities, experience for developing as a leader in ministry, of which Pastor Zach Olson is a mentor of that, and Pastor Scott is one of the original founders of that within our ecosystem. Please join that. Links in the show notes. Anyways, guys, Pastor Zach, P.S., thank you guys for joining episode 3 of the Disciple Standard podcast. We'll see you guys next week.
The future is now.